Ethics and marketing. Marketing, which is more than simply advertising, is the gamut of all business activities designed to try to promote business to the business. The purpose of a business, of course, is to make money, and marketing is a way to try to make more money. In business speak, there's a lot of ways to try to say about how it's creating value for the company and this and that, but basically, marketing is little more than simply trying to get people to buy the products that you are selling. Marketing seems to be with us in like a million ways now, and it is much, much more prevalent now because of technology, but marketing has been with us for a very long time. Centuries ago, it was simply a matter of hanging a sign outside your shop. More recently, it has developed, thanks partly to technology, into more of a science of how can we position our product in such a way that is going to elicit the most positive response from the people that we wish to be our customers. The more internal side of marketing are such questions as how should we price our product, how should we position our product in the marketplace, how should we look at our brand, and how we want people to think about our brand. Mostly here, though, we're going to be focusing on the direct business-to-consumer aspect of marketing, which is more commonly known as advertising. Like all other aspects of business, marketing is subject to some basic considerations of ethics. The word marketing, of course, comes from the idea of a market, and market exchange, the idea of buying and selling of products or services, has as its ethical core the idea of a respect for mutual autonomy between both the buyer and the seller of a product or service, and the idea that both people are benefiting from the exchange. As we've talked about in several other units in this course, the standard business view is that the market should be let alone with no regulation or interference from government because the market exchange is inherently ethical because it respects autonomy and because it brings mutual respect to all people involved. However, only the naive person would really believe that is 100% absolutely the case. For any and all transactions to truly be ethical, the transaction must be fully voluntary on all sides, and everyone engaged in the transaction or involved in the transaction must be fully informed about what's going on, and there must be real benefit, not just perceived benefit, not just a temporary idea that I'm benefiting from this, but a real, tangible benefit to both sides. The ethical problem with these market transactions tends to be that the buyer knows more and has more leverage in the situation than the consumer does, the buyer. Now, obviously, the buyer can and should show discretion, the old buyer beware idea, and the buyer can certainly walk away at any time and not be a buyer. But the dark side of marketing, and especially advertising, is to try and break through customer resistance. And that is a term used by marketers. There is such a thing as a marketing degree in which you learn how to break down that resistance from the consumer to buying the product. Now, that does very definitely imply a certain amount of coercion. Now, obviously, persuasion itself is not a problem. Everyone has a right to try to persuade someone to come around to their opinion or to buy their product. That is part of what advertising is. Hey, this is a great idea to buy this product. This is a great product. Why don't you buy it? Nothing wrong with that as long as the persuasion does not cross some sort of line where it's no longer a voluntary thing, but a type of coercion, a type of pressure to break down the rights of an individual to not be forced or pressured into buying something. We all know about the idea of a hard sell where that pressure is there, and we can certainly understand, at least most people can, that there is a very real amount of unethicalness in a too high pressure of a sales tactic. But of course, it's not that obvious that pressure is being placed because, of course, most human beings, when they feel pressured, they walk away. So the idea is, by marketers, to try and make it feel like you're not being pressured when in fact you are. And so we have to ask, is any exchange really voluntary? A lot of advertising really focuses on you don't have any other choice but to buy our product. And they produce a certain level of fixation, anxiety, and oh my God, I need this. Something bad will happen if I don't have it, or nothing good will happen if I don't have it. And these are ways of hard sell that may not be immediately apparent to the consumers that are looking at the advertising, looking at the marketing. And of course, one of the big ways that we see this pressure tactic going on in advertising is peer pressure. Everyone else has this. Don't you have that? You don't want to be left out, do you? And there's some subtle and not so subtle ways that this happens in advertising. And that peer pressure is designed to create a certain level of anxiety in the audience to try to go, oh my God, if I don't wear this, do this, consume that, people won't like me anymore. And alas, it's true, this is especially successful on young people who are very susceptible to peer pressure. The exchange is also not voluntary if there is some deceit going on. One of the ways that this happens is price fixing and price gouging. Recently, Amazon, everyone knows about Amazon, and pretty much everyone has bought from Amazon, was caught during its Amazon Prime sale day of claiming that the prices were reduced, when in fact they weren't. The prices were actually higher, but because you saw on there, oh, this is on sale, and oh, it's reduced price. Well, it's not. Now, that's a very old tactic. Amazon certainly didn't invent that. It's actually a very common practice in Europe, oddly enough, especially in tourist cities, where you'll have shops at everything 50% off, everything even 70% off. Well, 70% off of what? Well, 70% off if we priced it 70% higher than it is. It's like, no, it's always the same price. It's not really on sale. And certain corporations have been found guilty under the law of price fixing. They get together and they say, to preserve our profit margins, we will pretend that we're in competition, but we're really not. They're actually fixing prices. They agree to not undersell each other, to not compete on price. And the idea of a free market is, of course, you have price competition, and that benefits consumers. Well, not if the corporations are lying about price competition. And that leads us directly to the second big consideration is, are the consumers really being informed in this transaction? If you are being lied to, then your choice, your freedom, is being denied. Lying is always bad, and lying in a financial exchange, which is what purchasing a product is, that lack of information is unethical because it is depriving people of their right to consent and the right to be informed. Advertising and deception goes hand in hand. In a way, it is part of advertising. It's not overly cynical to say that every ad you ever see is partly trying to convince you that the product is better than it actually is. And that's kind of part of the game of it all. It's not that the product is really better than any other competing product, but it's designed to make it look like it is, to make it sound like it is. But then there's a certain line where there's actual deception going on, saying that a product will do this or that, and it doesn't actually do it at all. Saying the product is better than a competing product when it's not. Saying that it's cheaper or on sale, and it's not. There's a lot of complicated information, a lot of specifications to products that are just simply not mentioned. There can be hidden ingredients, there can be hidden side effects, there can be all kinds of things that are going on where a lack of information leads to a consumer who is not informed, as is their right to be informed. And the third consideration here is, are you really benefiting from that product? Now here I'll pick on Nike. Not that I have anything for or against Nike, but they're a great example here. Are Nike shoes better than any other brand of shoe? Well, funny enough, not even Nike claims their shoes are better. Do people think that Nike shoes are better? Well, kind of, maybe. But they think that they should have Nike shoes. Why? Well, because of marketing, because Anyone who is less than under the age of 30 has from birth been completely bombarded with Nike, 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 Nike all of their lives. So you buy Nike. Why? Well, everyone else buys Nike. Was it better? Are you really benefiting from wearing Nike shoes? Probably not. But see, marketing is trying to create a need. There's a slightly cynical but amazingly accurate phrase that I heard once from a teacher, and told me that, and all of us, that marketing is the art of creating a need where there is none. Nobody needs Nike shoes. Not even Michael Jordan needed Nike shoes. But millions of people think and sincerely believe that they need Nike shoes, which is why Nike can charge hundreds of dollars for something that costs them less than $5 to make and ship and sell in a store. Is that unethical? Some would say it is. But others would say, including I suspect Nike, that, hey, who are we hurting? Where is the crime here? And if we can convince people to buy something and pay them that much, we're not outright lying to them. In fact, it is the case in defense of Nike. They don't say anything about their products at all. Nike marketing for like the last 2 decades or more has just simply been watching a bunch of people running around doing athletic stuff, and then you just show the Nike swoosh and just do it. What does that even mean? It's creating a false need. It's creating a false desire. But if Nike can get away with it, they're not lying. Okay. So Nike, and that would include just about any of the more popular brands in the world, they are creating a contrived want, a contrived need, creating a need where there is none. The idea of impulse buying is a little trickier, but that is why simple-to-grab, cheap items are always stocked near the cash register of stores. The candy, since I was a kid, the candy has always been right at the cash register. As you're waiting in line, oh look, it's candy. You like candy. The candy's right there. You hardly have to do anything. Just reach out your hand and take the candy bar. Impulse buy. Marketing does try to create a situation where you're familiar with the brand name. Oh, I see the brand name. I'll just buy it because I know that brand name. Now, Nike shoes don't really fit into that. A Nike shoe is probably not an impulse purchase, because usually impulse purchases work best when they're at a very low price point, because there is a certain psychological resistance to paying a lot of money for something on impulse. But if it's only $1, hey, that's not a problem. And obviously, of course, if a company is making an unsafe product, which we've covered before, then that's strictly unethical. You can't say that a consumer is benefiting from a product that hurts them. The fourth and final ethical aspect here that we can talk about is this concept of values itself in terms of a more broad, overarching sense of marketing. The redlining of mortgages, that's a huge and complex issue. The textbook does talk about it. It doesn't talk about it sufficiently, so we're going to kind of avoid that here. But the notion that you have one set of marketing standards for one neighborhood and a different one for another neighborhood, which is usually on ethnic or race lines, that's obviously unethical. It's obviously illegal. But because of the systemic racism within our society, it's seldom prosecuted. One thing we will go in more depth is this idea of informed consent. A consumer has a right to be sufficiently informed about what is actually in the product or service that they are purchasing. One of the things that is ubiquitous in our society now in the digital age is the end user license agreement. And there are various names that this goes under, but usually whenever you create an account in anything online, you have to click something that says that you read and agreed to either the license agreement or the user agreement or some sort of agreement that you are agreeing to. Now, let's be honest about one thing, and that is no one reads those things. If you try, maybe when you were younger, you started trying to read them and you worried about them, and it's just this on and endless gobbledygook of legalese and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And it's very difficult to understand. And of course, if you don't agree with it, you're not going to be able to use this website or this service or whatever, so you just click and move on. Were you fully informed? Well, the business would say yes, and of course that's why they get you to click on that you agree that you have read it and you agree that you agree to it, because they can then say in court, well, we informed you. Were you really informed? When you signed up for that email account, when you signed up for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is the kids are using these days, did you have consent? Did you really give consent? Did you really have information about what in the heck was going on there? This is part of marketing. Did you really receive adequate information about what it really means to have a Gmail account or a Facebook account or whatever it is? If you're not on Gmail or Facebook, what is it that you use online? Everyone uses something online. Were you really informed about what it means? But here's the other thing about these informed consent things from companies. They don't say anything other than really, boiling it down, you have absolutely no right to sue them, and they can terminate your use at a whim. It's basically laying out how in these sets of transactions, all of the rights and all of the power is to the corporation. The end user agreement, the licensing agreement, is setting out the power dynamic of the relationship. It's basically saying you're in their house, you follow their rules, and you can't do anything about it. Do you really have consent? Did you really consent to do that? The other aspect of this slide, which is very worth thinking about, did you consent to use the operating system that you use on your computer or on your phone? Well, you didn't really have a choice. I know Apple exists. There are Macs out there, and like 5% of the world uses Macs. 95% of the world uses Windows. I know there's a couple people out there that uses Linux, or however it's really pronounced. No one can keep it straight. And yeah, you have to be a super geek in order to understand Linux. I know, I've tried. But you didn't consent to use Windows. You didn't consent to use Word. You didn't consent to Android. You didn't consent to use the Apple iOS. iPhones are a little bit more popular than Macs. But you have to live in their world. You didn't consent to live in their world. You didn't consent to be born either. You didn't consent to be born in the country that you're in, on and on. In response to any of this, the corporation will say, with some truth attached, well, if you don't like it, just don't use our product. And Microsoft can say that, hey, you don't have to use Word. And yeah, there are some alternatives out there that are very hard to find and more difficult to use. But you know that if you are a student at this school, you have to use this software. And your school gives you this email. Here's your email address. In order to function at this school, you have to use this email address, and you have to do all the things from email that you need to do to be a student. But you didn't consent to the use of that software system. The school inflicted it on you. And this happens. And you can say, well, that's just life. And there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah, life sometimes is not fair. But this is part of that consent thing. Is it really ethical that we live in this society where we don't really have free market choices? Now, the text talks about marketing to vulnerable people. Mostly in the world, it's called exploitative marketing. And this is marketing to people who are easily exploited or vulnerable in trying to get them to buy things where the power dynamic between the advertiser and the consumer is really tilted. One of the main ways that this actually functions in real life is marketing to children or teenagers, and there's been a lot of talk recently about how vaping is being sold in and marketed in such ways that it is very appealing to tweens and young teenagers to try to get them hooked on vaping. And it's just as addictive and just as dangerous as real smoking. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And there's some pushback now, just like there was pushback from cigarettes back in the day, long before any of us were around, where it was marketed almost as a healthy product. Well, it's not a healthy product, but you market it in such a way that you get people hooked to the product, that they need the product, physically addicted to it, and that's creating this vulnerability. And so the marketing then becomes even more effective because you can be more easily exploited. Because target marketing tends to, in our internet age, refer to the practice of you put a cookie on a browser because someone has shown interest in a product by visiting their website, and then more advertising will be targeted at that person because they're interested in that product. And you know this. If you ever try to say, how much does it cost to fly to Tahiti? You will suddenly get lots more ads about, hey, how'd you like to fly to Tahiti? And here's airlines and here's hotels and stuff like that. Well, that's just target marketing. Some people think that's a horrible thing. Oh, my God. Other people say, well, what's the issue? It's being tailored to me. And you can decide for yourself what your opinion is on that. Now, the arguments against this type of targeted marketing tend to fall on two main points. One is that your personal information is being used, and therefore it's some sort of violation of your privacy. And two, that you are really not being fully informed and you do not fully consent to this going on. And there has been a lot of pushback in the last few years from people who are deeply concerned for various reasons about how much of their personal information is being collected and how much is being used. So far, this information seems to be only used to target more advertising at you, because that's what business does more than anything else, is try to market to consumers, potential consumers. Obviously, if personal information is being gathered to be used against someone to actually harm someone, like in dictatorships where you went to that website, you are going to be arrested for political subversion, then that's a problem. But there's a bit of burden of proof here on people to say, well, how is it that I keep getting these ads about flying to Tahiti is some sort of violation of your consent? For the most part, people don't like advertising, but we are used to it. We watch TV. We have commercials. We listen to the radio. There are commercials. That's the nature of consuming free media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're all free. You don't have to pay to use them. Therefore, you are the product, as I mentioned before. You are the product. You are consumers to be advertised to. And Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., they sell you to advertisers. If you don't like it, don't use those sites.